like when the worlds of music and advocacy overlap? That's the question that I look at on this podcast. It's called It's Giving, and it's hosted by me, Ingela Travers-Hayward. This week, it's giving Sadie Dupuis from the band Speedy Ortiz. Sadie ended up on this podcast through a unique set of events, I would say. Although I guess that could be said for every guest that has ended up on this show so far. But anyways, Perry, my co-director, was doing Narcan distribution for our nonprofit, This Must Be the Place, at this amazing bookstore in Columbus, Ohio called $2 Radio. It turned out that the event that night was none other than for Sadie, because in addition to being a musician, she's also a published author. At the end of the event, they got to talking, and it turns out that Sadie has cared about Narcan distribution for ages. Even pre-pandemic, she was talking to music venues, trying to make them see the importance of carrying something like this behind the bar. And so what we talk about in this episode is why she cared so deeply about it and the work that went into doing that. And just from a personal note, you know, it's really remarkable that she's been doing this for that long, because when we started in 2022, you know, talking to people, talking to the music industry about Narcan was unique. You know, this was not something that was very common back in 2022. There was still stigma involved. You know, there was still the lack of education. So the fact that Sadie has been having these conversations for years is really, really admirable. And so it was a really exciting thing to be able to hear her talk about. If this is the first time you're listening to this episode, go ahead and subscribe, follow, and listen to the back catalog. I've talked to Animal Collective, Sylvan Esso, Sleigh Bells Now, a bunch of other people. It's a nice little growing collection, so go back and take a listen to the archives. But otherwise, thank you for following and subscribing. I see every follow, I get all those notifications, and it just means the absolute world that people are willing to learn about this, because I think every conversation so far I've walked away with a new little bit of knowledge that I just didn't know before I pressed record. Thank you as always, and without further ado, here's Sadie. Welcome to the pod. Thank you so much for being here.
Of course, stoked to do it.
So, I think you were someone that I really wanted to talk to because, you know, with Speedy Ortiz, since its inception in the early 2010s, it seems like social good has just been like part and parcel with what you do. You know, it seems like raising awareness, raising funds, you know, whatever it is, it was sort of baked into what you do from the beginning, or at least that's how it appears to me. And so I'm curious, do you sort of remember that first moment where your musical career and activism or social good sort of started to overlap a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think for a lot of musicians who come up in punk or DIY, these are just things that are taught to you at the same time. I feel like the earliest shows that I remember going to, at least by choice as like a teenager, were benefit shows, or were raising awareness for something, or were, you know, I started playing in bands around just before Bush 2 reelection. So like every single, you know, compilation I was buying was like a Rock Against Bush type thing. And all of the, you know, punk shows were sort of speaking on these issues, or were also like letter writing initiatives or whatever else. So I think that for me, it's just, that was always the way I was taught to be engaged with music as a community project, which is very much my background. And when Speedy becomes like a job and not just like way to play shows with my friends, which, you know, it still is that too, but when it started to take on some of the more professional aspects, that was sort of non-negotiable for all of us. Like, how do we continue to do the kinds of things that are happening at DIY spaces with like these bigger rooms and bigger platforms?
Do you remember sort of one of your own examples of when that first really took shape, of something that, okay, now, yeah, I've got a band, here's what I should do? Do you remember sort of an early instance of you doing something that stands out?
Yeah, I mean, the first record I made, I did in high school, and I actually did the record as a benefit. So all of the proceeds went to purchasing supplies for families who'd been affected by Katrina. So what the year is like 2005. So that was sort of like, from the first album I ever made, it was sort of a part of it where there's some sort of like fundraising initiative. And in that case, it was all the money went towards that. Not that there
Do,
was drastic money for my,
I mean,
rural
listen,
high school album, but
listen, as a nonprofit, any money helps. So let me tell you, it always makes such a difference.
I
Just
think
like
I
when
heard it sold a couple, it bought a couple fridges, which was cool.
yes, it's not nothing, honestly. And like, yeah, when you're sort of on the receiving end of any kind of help, it just is like, oh my God, someone cares about what we're doing. So yeah, it's always, even the smallest things make such a difference. I mean, this sort of jumps ahead in time, but because you mentioned, Bush too, um, do you sort of notice a difference between how bands are sort of weaving activism, or how they were weaving activism into their careers back then versus how they are now? Like, have you noticed any kind of shift in either there's more of a prevalence now of bands sort of using their platform in whatever way, or there's less, or it's different ways? Like, have you seen any kind of change?
Yeah, I feel like it's a continuation of the same ideology, but with different tools. Like the way that I came up doing things is related to and descended from the way that Discord bands were doing things or Riot Girl bands were doing things, but with slightly different tools. And I think Speedy is sort of at the tail end of like the blogosphere and blog rock. So it wasn't that we were doing these fundraising or awareness raising or whatever other initiatives, with like the front facing camera and having to speak directly to an audience to make those appeals. I've never been on TikTok. So
It's
I think
me.
it's just like a difference of technology, but with the same spirit of making art purposeful beyond just the pleasure of enjoying your medium. It's about using art to connect with others and with your community. But there's different ways of reaching that community now than like when I say this like I'm ancient, but it's like even in like a few years, things are so drastically different.
I mean, listen, I turned 40 last year, and it like
Yeah,
felt
we're
like,
like
now,
around the same age.
yeah, now I just feel like I talk about my age and every single thing I do. It's like, oh my God,
Yes,
yeah.
I was very to a friend that like I'm not concerned about how old I am, but I'm concerned that this year I've started forgetting how old I am. I've
And
said the wrong age number like several times this year, and that was not true a year ago. So
it's rough. And I always describe them as, oh yeah, now the kids are doing this. The kids are doing this.
the
I'm like, oh
kids,
my
yeah,
God, rein it
yeah,
in.
yeah.
But
There are a couple
I,
generations behind us now.
I do wonder though, and this is something that I've talked to some of the other artists about, is like, social media, technology, all that. Do you feel like its existence now helps artists for the better when it comes to this sort of thing, or is it sort of creating this different form of pressure, sort of now that it exists?
Um, I wouldn't say that anything owned by billionaires is really helping artists. I look at these platforms as tools that can work in some ways, but aren't the be all end all. Especially if you look at like I can see the metrics of when I post something that has nothing to do with anything and is just a face, what percentage of you know whatever 35,000 people see it versus I've said Gaza in a thing and then like 200 people see it.
Oh,
Um,
interesting. Oh, so you
so
do notice there is a noticeable decline of when you talk about something. Maybe I'm sure,
definitely,
again,
and who
my
knows how much of that is just that like the things that drive engagement in this escapist website are, they want to see 300 ways to do tofu. But
it's a lot of ways.
it's not, and I think like on the one part there's that you're not going to reach necessarily very many people by just talking about issues on the platform. But on the other hand, you're talking about these things in your day-to-day life, so it's going to seep into wherever you're communicating. And that's an important thing too. And then the third thing is it's a bit of an echo chamber where, anybody following my band very likely has similar politics. When they don't, they let me know. But it's not that many of them. So what does it actually accomplish to, talk about these things other than normalizing being able to talk about whether that's harm reduction or whether that's, stopping a genocide.
Yeah. God. I mean, as a person who cares about things in the world, to put it extremely simply, do you find pressure to have to acknowledge every single thing? Or like, how do you decide, okay, we're going to put up a post about this or story about that? Like, is it hard to sort of parse out what is it that I'm going to make my opinion known, even though it's probably obvious what my opinion is on this?
I think I certainly don't feel as much pressure as not pressure necessarily, but I was way more online when Twitter was Twitter and it was still fun. And
Yeah.
so it was getting all my thoughts on everything,
Yeah.
including things I was wrong about, you know. That was just a place to have unfiltered word vomit, whether you were saying something good or just something kind
I
of stupid
remember.
and funny. Um, I have not ever been as drawn to Instagram, and like I said, I'm not on TikTok. So if I'm gonna post on Instagram, it's like not fun for me. I don't really enjoy being on there. So I kind of reserve it for things that I feel are like important to put on that platform, whether that's here are tour dates or currently I'm doing a fundraiser for the second year in a row. There's this run through Philly that's like a 10-mile run through our main street. It's really fun.
Cool.
And one of our great local harm reduction groups, the Everywhere Project, sends a bunch of runners in to raise money. So I'm
That's
like doing
awesome.
that again this year. So I'm like, cool, I now have something I'm excited to post about. It's just kind of hard to get me excited to post. But if I actually think that the posting will do something helpful, then sure. And in this
Well,
case, it's raising, money for ice and Narcan and shoes and socks and everything that people need.
have you always been a person that sort of not just, talks about what they care about, but sort of, and I wanted to talk about another context in a second, but yeah, have you always been someone that's like, I'm not just going to talk about it, I'm actually going to do something about it?
I think I feel reticent to talk about things unless I feel that I'm also doing it because I don't know how much talking accomplishes if you're not also backing it up with how you're conducting your life or using your time or resources. So I think often I'm talking about things that I'm also engaged with. Yeah.
Have you, is it, you know, uh, is it difficult to sort of turn your brain from the music to sort of what goes into putting on events, putting on fundraisers, things like that for those things that you care about?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that has been lucky about being coming from this DIY background is I learned how to wear a lot of hats. And then on the other edge of that is I'm not really quite in that world anymore. We do have booking agents and publicist and record label and manager and whoever else. So if there's something that the band feels passionate about and wants to make happen, we're generally working with people who care about very similar things to what we care about. So I think it's always I think folks in the music industry are always excited to have something to work together on that is not just, booking another concert. That is important too, but it feels nice to be able to use it for good things. So
That
we have
actually,
help is what I'm saying.
but that's a great point. I never really thought about it in that way of, yeah, once you get to this certain level, you do have that infrastructure. So it's like, okay, I'm not having to manage every single part of my career. Now I sort of have this ability to like turn my brain to maybe something different. And I think it's really cool that that's something different ends up being things that end up helping the people around you.
Yeah, and like music workers are often musicians as well. If they're not, they came up going to shows, and a lot of the folks that we work with come from that same exact background, going to punk and DIY shows that were always a fundraiser of, 20 people passing the same $5 around. So I think we all kind of come from knowing how to do this stuff, having an interest in it, and being excited when music can put something good into the world aside from just art.
Well, you've actually in mentioning that have seamlessly teed up one of the main things I want to talk to you about, United Musicians and Allied Workers. And I think like I'm going to ask you what that is, but before I do that, I guess it's how did you get involved? Because from what I've read and hopefully what you'll talk about is you were really involved in this, So how did it come to be? What is it? But yeah, how did it come so that you were as involved as you are?
Yeah, and I'll clarify, I'm not as much involved day to day at this point, but certainly put in a lot of hours and support everything they do and continue to engage where possible, more at a local level than with the national campaigns.
Mhm.
So I was part of a group of musicians that organized a sort of boycott against Amazon, a campaign against specifically Amazon's contracts with Palantir, and it was called No Music for Ice. And this was in 2019, I believe. So the gist of this is we, as music workers, we said we would withhold exclusive labor for Amazon while they maintain these contracts that were powering deportations and other forms of border policing. So there were a bunch of us involved in this. The gist was basically to stop Amazon from spreading further into music spaces without calling attention to the human rights issues attached to them. Not that ICE and Amazon's collaboration are the only Amazon issues. And of course, in 2020, we saw a lot of horrible things happen immediately to Amazon warehouse workers working under COVID. But that was sort of a group of people who worked on this one project together.
Yeah.
And separately, there were some other musician organizers that I knew who had been part of this South by Southwest campaign that was also drawing attention to the festival's ties with military as well as the low payment for artists. So basically, people behind both of these collaborative projects got on one big CC'd email that maybe was like 25 people, like first week of COVID. We're just like, well, none of us are on tour. What should we work on? So the initial campaign was directing people to call their representatives to get unemployment funding. We actually had a dial, I don't know what these things are called.
Like a rotary phone? No.
Not a rotary phone, but you could call a toll-free number and press buttons and be connected.
Okay,
and I got to provide that. I get to be the Mr. Movie phone of this.
Oh
it's
my
like, hi,
God,
you've reached Union of Musicians and Allied Workers call line, or whatever I said. That was a real career
That's an
accomplishment.
important position. You're the first person or first voice they interact with,
Hang on, we're connecting you. Whatever.
Oh my
whatever
God, that's wild.
So that was like the first project we worked on. And then it sort of split into all these different campaigns. And for many years, one of my main interests in organizing around music was to get more harm reduction supplies into nightlife. So I was very involved with a venues subgroup that was not only working on Narcan, naloxone drug testing in venues, but also COVID protocol in venues and meeting with NEVA to see what they were working on with regards to COVID protocol. A few of us got trained as, I hate the title, but COVID compliance officers. It's very,
I remember that.
Very copy. People were mad at us, but it was like, all it means is we know how to wipe down services. So that was sort of
that takes me back. Oh my God. Oh,
yeah. Like, because you do film, right?
So and so it's really true. I haven't heard those three words back to back. Just as an aside, during COVID, because production shut down. Once it slowly started to open up, I was working as a COVID compliance officer and making sure the entire crews went and got COVID tested. So wrangling like 60 gaffers and, best boys to make sure they go get their nose swabbed, and that was what the COVID compliance officer's job was in that day and age. So that, oh my God.
And one of the things we were sort of discussing is like, there is just a lot more money behind and coming out of film products than there is in music. So we're like, well, there's no money for most of the things that are being recommended for safe reopening, but with some of us better informed, we can sort of crib what's possible to advise some of the touring artists who are back on the road because they have to be and need to find a way to do harm reduction, essentially, to make it as safe as it can be, and when it is not going to be ever going to be fully 100%, guarantee of safety. So those were some of the projects that I was like really involved in and interested in, and then a local started in Philly, and some of our initial projects were similar things like destroying Narcan at concerts. And we also did a instruments into prisons gear drive where we had people bring by underused, underloved amplifiers and guitars and microphones, and we brought them to state facilities around Pennsylvania, which was great. That was like a fun project.
How did that even come about? Like, how did you? I mean, it's so random that people think of people in prison in that capacity, of more than just like, oh, it's horrible in there. It's like, okay, but what can we do to try and help them while they're in there? How did you think of that?
Well, on a personal level, I had a family member who was incarcerated for long period of time, who was a musician, and I knew how important it had been for him and his, time there to have access to instruments. And there was another UMAW local, I think it was in LA, that was doing a similar project with Die Jim Crow Records, where they were helping to purchase and collect donations for equipment and get that into facilities. So when we were working on this local, another of my comrades sort of has a similar background of working with incarcerated people or people on trial, and is a musician as well, and knew some folks who were involved with, or rather he is involved with books into prisons. So he had a sense of like some of the protocol and how much it really depends on who you get over a day. So we spent like a year, doing outreach and collecting things. And then we also partnered with this great Philly music nonprofit, Beyond the Bars, and their whole, I don't know if you're aware of this group, but
I've heard, yeah.
So they get computers and music equipment to kids who may be affected by the pipeline into prisons.
So you mentioned, you had
so they worked with us not only to collect things, but to like do transportation and pickups, etc.
Getting them in there, like you said, is I would almost say 90% of the battle. It's not.
My bandmate
easy.
and I actually, we drove all around Pennsylvania, just like dropping things off, hoping for the best. But
you hope that it's a nice CO.
It worked out pretty good, yeah. Yeah, sometimes someone would change positions while we were emailing, and suddenly the answer was like better or worse.
What is it that? So yeah, you say you have this personal connection to that, and you also talk about obviously harm reduction, and that's how we first met you. Is something that's so important to you. Why is harm reduction something that also is something that you really deeply care about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just I think it's similar to almost every person who becomes engaged with this, which is just having lost friends to overdose. First friend to pass from overdose is like, we're talking the border of like the Bush 2 re-election. So it's been like over 20 years of losing people to a preventable death. And maybe in like 2018, I don't remember what year, but I feel like I just lost, sometimes it happens this way. You just lose a bunch of people like right in a row, totally disparate people, and just feels so terrible. I feel like grief hits everybody very hard, but I feel like I don't feel like I lifetime diagnosed as OCD, and when someone close to me dies, that's just like such a main trigger of those symptoms for me. And I was just looking for any way to feel like I had any measure of control. And so starting to post about carrying Narcan and harm reduction groups and sharing resources was like a way I could not spiral out as badly. So that's sort of how I became engaged with working with some groups more directly. I made some posts about carrying Narcan, and I started getting hit up by different folks who did distro or worked with groups, and we began to have folks table at shows to give out resources where possible. This is all like in pre-COVID, where like the scale of resources was quite different. It was like, oh, you're coming through Chicago? Like, we can do on-site spectrometer drug testing for your show. Like, oh my God, of course, sign us up, which was, the Chicago Recovery Alliance. So we were doing a lot of like work with groups directly when passing through cities. Now it has become more of a similar to like what you guys enable. We carry naloxone or Narcan with us and give it out at the merch table when people ask for it. But that was sort of the origin of starting to engage with this stuff publicly, was just having lost friends to something that you shouldn't have to lose friends to.
Yeah, I tell people sometimes, like, if I'm talking to them at the booth, it's like there's no kind of way to lose someone that's easier than another way, but I think when you lose someone to an overdose, it's like such a unique form of grief because there's just like so much helplessness, right? It's like it's always hard, but I think when you've lost someone to an overdose, it's just yeah, you have a new amount of empathy for when you meet someone else who's also had to go through that, you
Yep.
know. Have
And
you
it's like I think a lot of what I noted at that time and feels way less true now was just the stigma surrounding talking about overdose prevention, or overdose of just overall safety for drug users. It felt very stigmatized to talk about. I did an interview with a friend, now friend. I was just meeting her at the time, who worked at that time for Harm Reduction Coalition. I forget what outlet we did this for, but it was like, one of these things where there's like a million people watching on YouTube, and reading the comments were so shocking to me. Just the way
was this
that
still in
people
this
like,
day and age, or was this
this
when
was
you
like
were starting out?
2018 maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're just like bloodlust, basically. Let people die for their diseases or, interest in using drugs, like as if, anytime you go to a bar, you're not using drugs. So I think just seeing the kind of outrageous response made me think about what was at the heart of that. And it was just that I wasn't seeing a lot of even-handed conversations about drug use and safe drug use at gigs, despite it being so prevalent in nightlife. So we just sort of started not only to have groups table, but we were fundraising for different harm reduction groups, and tours at that time. So talking about it in the same way that like we're talking about it is just like a normal fact of life, and something that whether or not you use drugs, you should be aware of, because you can play a role in helping, your neighbor,
It's
your friend, your coworker live another day. That became very important to me to just, yeah, get comfortable talking about that in a even-handed way. And so if people come to
yeah.
the merch table
eh,
like, well, I don't know how to feel about this. I'm like, well,
It's
it's just a normal thing. Like, do you think
it's
people should have insulin? It's not really.
and
It's a public health issue.
what I find encouraging is like, and I can't imagine having those conversations that you were having in 2018, because when we started this in 2022, I distinctly remember, yeah, it's so much of like, what? No, I don't need Narcan, yucky, versus a year even or 2 years later, it's totally different. And suddenly everyone wants this. So yeah, in 2018, you talking to folks about this, oh my goodness. Like I can only imagine how much more severe, yeah, the reactions must have been back then.
But it usually could end in a decent place if it was a face-to-face conversation. People online are insane, and this is part of why I just don't care enough about posting anymore. Like, well, you're not gonna win everybody over, but at least you put the idea out there for them to think about. And if they had an insane reaction, at least they, it means that they thought about it today.
Well, and it seems like the work you're doing now is so rooted in the face to face, and the like, let's talk to people. You're based in Philly. Let's talk to my community. What do you need? How can I help you? And I think like, yeah, I often wrestled with, okay, well, I can't solve the opioid epidemic, but what can I do? And then you just realize, okay, sometimes just having those conversations with people directly, that's how you can really make a difference. And it seems like that's how you're sort of rooting the work you do.
Yeah. Yeah, and not necessarily, always face to face. There's plenty of people that you can have one-to-one conversations with online, but I think, yeah, broadcasting widely, you're maybe not going to reach everybody. It's about letting people know individually or in smaller groups. Here's what resources are available to you and could help someone you love or yourself.
Maybe this is a silly question, but do you sort of consider yourself, I guess like a generalist for good, right? Do you sort of care about, yeah, everything? Or if you were to describe what you're passionate about, would you sort of boil it down into something else more specific? If that makes any sense?
I don't know if I have like one broad description for my ethical framework, but and there's, I mean, like I said, there's things I'm sure I'm wrong about all the time, but try to do the best you can for other people and your people too.
And I think that sort of leads me into the question that I always like to end on, because I think,
Like,
you know,
honestly,
the
harm reduction is sort of how I think of my ethical framework, because it doesn't just pertain to people who use drugs and overdose prevention. It's about the choices you make every day as you as you navigate living in this hellscape.
I always tell
You can
people
maybe make things a
sunscreen.
tiny bit less bad. Yes,
Sunscreen is another
sunscreen's
form of
one we
harm
aren't
reduction.
bad about, but yes, it is.
So I guess, yeah, my final question is, the world's pretty tough right now. If someone's listening to this and they're like, I just want to do something where I feel like I'm helping, or I want to do some good, but I just have no idea what to do. What do you sort of recommend for someone to do when they're sort of feeling that, like, I mean, crushing helplessness that is really common right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think an advice that I hear often is just to do one nice thing for someone else when you're feeling terrible. And that can come in the form of, I just got a great, this Everywhere Project fundraiser's on my mind because we're doing this thing for them, or I'm running this race for them. How soon is it? 6 weeks. I'm not
Oh,
at my mileage yet, but
oh
I'll
my
be there soon.
God, I'm impressed.
But at least let me see what they pulled up. But it was like $5 buys like ice for the entire day in helping people when it's hot out. You maybe think that $5 doesn't go very far, but it really does. It makes a difference to a lot of people in a day. So, giving $5 isn't the be all end all of everything, but I think sometimes people feel disempowered from giving these small amounts because they don't think it actually makes a difference. But to small groups doing good shit, are we allowed to say shit on this? This is a cussing podcast. Fuck yeah, shit, yeah. Give $5. It makes a difference to people in your neighborhood. If you have the ability to donate your time, go pass stuff out with a group for an hour or two. You are, again, giving, it seems like such a little thing, but it makes a big difference to the people you meet and the people you're able to help out. So I think and you don't have the energy to do either of these things or the facility to do either of these things, just check in on a friend. Like, give them the little boost to maybe donate $5 or spend an hour out with a group. I think there's all kinds of ways to feel slightly less miserable in this world. Helping others is sort of at the root of all of it.
Sadie, thank you so much for talking
Yeah,
to me.
I'm so stoked we got to do it.
I really, really appreciate it. And thank you for everything you're doing for harm reduction.
Yeah,
As
thank
someone
you
who
for everything
has
you're doing.
benefited
The amount
from,
of bands, I will say, of the many groups I have worked with, y'all have the musician corner locked down. I'm so happy to see all the artists who wind up carrying and passing out Narcan because of you guys.